साथ जा रहे हैं.
Correct. All the members of my family,
Yeah.
they need to be there.
Money.
What else?
Use money.
Can I add in?
Yeah.
Yeah. So resources can be right from money to the human inputs and everything we require for a trip. Anything which is required on the trip, right from your candies, your notepads, your camera, all these things would, I guess it would be in the resources.
Fantastic. So money, time, things that I'm going to take, all of that is going to be part of my resource category.
Yeah.
Before I go on my trip, what are some activities now that I will need to do in order to plan this trip?
So to start with the things like taking the tickets, then planning, strategize, and the logistic things.
My family might get a little worried if I tell them we need to strategize.
but we need to look out what are the things we can go and visit there, what are the places we visit there, and what are the shoppings we can go for,
I might need to research things.
Yeah.
What are
Research.
my options that will be available? I need to plan. So I need to sit down and have chats with my family.
Correct.
On the same page in terms of what this trip look like. I'll have to book tickets, of course.
Yes.
Maybe apply for leave. That's an activity. If I don't have to leave, husband doesn't inform, the school if those are check things like that. Is it a vacation time? Make bookings. Things even available for me. So all things will all be under my activity bucket. My outputs for me are the things that I can touch, feel, and count. So for me, when I think about outputs that I'll need, it'll be like my itinerary or my ticket or my booking voucher. Those are my things that come under this output bucket. Unless I tick those things off, I'm not going to get to my next step, which is my outcome. What would be the outcome of this trip?
You guys either enjoyed it or, you breathed there.
What's my outcome?
Yeah, outcome would be, I think, you have reached the place where you were planning to go. Gone for some of the activities which you had planned. And you enjoyed some of it, you didn't enjoy some of it, or whatever it was like, but you did all the activities which you had planned. And you reach your destination kind of place.
Okay, so one is that maybe I'll finish my activities and that's an outcome. What else is an outcome? What was that goal of my trip?
Maniji, just a bit louder. Some of them can't hear you.
Sure. What was the goal of my trip? What is my outcome?
Because it was Kana, maybe to see tiger.
To bond, to bond with the family.
To bond with the family. So yes, I think personally my outcome definitely would be seeing tigers. If I don't see tigers, I'll be devastated.
Actually, outcomes can be different for different people. If in the trip itself. So how many people are going, whether they are all family people or whether they are a friend circle, depending on that, the outcome would be different for each or maybe most of them.
Absolutely. So, but if you remember, we started this because I wanted to have good relations with my family. Right? So that one common outcome that I must keep in mind is that everybody in my family has a good time. Right? Correct. I can't make it about me seeing tigers. I can't make it about somebody else wanting to go on long walks. I have to keep that outcome in mind even when I am planning my output and my activities, right? When I'm choosing, if my goal is that immediate outcome that I'm expecting from this trip is that everybody, we have 4 members, all 4 have to, at the end of the day, if I take a survey and ask them to rate the trip, I want them to give me a 5-star rating, right? If that is my goal, I need to make sure that I keep that goal in mind, whether I'm booking tickets, whether I'm booking the travel journey, because it can't be that I book stuff that somebody will find, you know, they are not good. I don't want to travel by this train. I don't want to do this. It's not going to help me maybe reach my outcome. What is that impact that I'm looking at?
We get
and someone
we get a good break from our daily routine, so that will be the big impact. So it will affect our rest of the, you know, days in a very fruitful manner. Everybody is so tied up in every day-to-day routine activities. So we all need to get a little bit break in our daily routine to affect more on our other aspects in routine days next.
So again, I would put that more in my medium-term outcome category. It's about bonding with my family, right? But what is that long-term impact that I'm hoping trips like this will help me achieve?
With the increased bond, maybe problem sharing will increase. People will try and, you know, discuss their issues more.
Exactly. So I think the impact that I'm looking for is that long-term continued good relations in my family. And the only way I'm going to actually be able to measure that impact is not going to be today, but it is going to be 10 years hence. Children have gone off to college and we're sitting around and someone says, oh, remember those trips we used to take when we were kids? Those were really fun. Remember those times when we had that conversation? I remember you telling me this. That was really fun. And I think that is that longer term perspective of, will these things in fact add up to that final impact that I intend to have? And I think the reason I use this example as a warm up is just because I think we do this intuitively, perhaps, in a lot of things in our life. But to keep that in mind always, of what can I expect to see today, another year from now, 3 years from now, maybe 10 years from now? Is it in moving me in the direction that I want to be? And I think when we think of planning indicators, you still can't hear me? Can you hear me now? Very low? Better? Okay. Is to keep that long-term impact and outcome lens in mind, no matter what you do, because that is the only thing that will help you steer your ship in the direction you want to go in. So to come back to our let's plan, sorry, here we are. You know, here are the inputs I need, the activities I would have had. My outcome is that everybody enjoyed this vacation. And my overall longer term impact is that I continue to have good relations in my family. If we all hate as each other after this trip because we had a miserable time and somebody said, you know, they were always fighting together and you never let me do anything that I wanted to do, it'll be a disaster. My impact will not be met, even though I tick all those boxes of all the activities that I wanted to do. With that in mind, let's look now at strategic planning, you know, and theories of change and log frames. What really is each of these things and when do we use which one? A strategic plan really is an in-depth document that is often prepared at the start of a program, but also periodically as the organization evolves and transitions. Typically, strategic plans will look at a 3-year time frame. Some of them even look at 5 years. These are the sum of the elements that go into a strategic plan. And what I have done is I've created a resource pack, which Meher will share at the end of this presentation, which has samples of all of these things. So it has a sample strategic plan that you can look at. There are several out there. It's important to keep in mind that it resonates with your organization. So it's not so much about creating a strategic plan and ticking off the boxes and making sure that I had all these elements, but to really make sure that does it reflect my work? Does it reflect the culture of the organization? There is no point making a strategic plan that nobody in your organization except your board can connect with, for example. So a strategic plan becomes really your living, breathing roadmap. It's like planning my trip without knowing where I'm going or how I'm getting there will never get me there. So this is really my roadmap to getting there. And these are all the different elements that can go into a good strategic plan. Log frames theories of change. So often you find, even with strategic plans, that there is an illustration or a picture version that is created. And I find those really useful because pictures at the end of the day are simple to connect with. Anybody in your organizations, I've known organizations who've put up bits of their strategic plan all over the office, whether it is vision, mission, values, goals, just as a constant reminder to people about why we're doing, what we're doing, who we are as an organization. A log frame, which is on your right, is a very simple tool which is often used to look at the chain of events that are expected to occur. The input, output, outcome, impact that we did, that really is a log frame. And that's probably my favorite because I just find it so easy to use, and it's incredibly useful when planning an M&E framework. A theory of change became a lot more popular, maybe I'd say 10, 12 years ago with organizations, because many non-profits struggled with this idea that change is linear. That you're telling me that if I do this, then this will happen and this will happen. But that's not how change happens, because there are so many intersecting pathways, right? I might say that if I enroll students into my program and they learn this particular skill, they will be successful. But the reality is there's a whole social system in which they operate. There is their community, there is family members, there's financial resources that are constrained. I'm not necessarily targeting each of those things. My intervention and my capability can only look at this one piece of that pie. A theory of change then is a way where I can at least acknowledge all these intersections. And the reason a theory of change is a really good way to think about how change is expected to occur is because especially when you're looking at evaluations, I think when you're looking at sort of monitoring, what should I monitor? What is that outcome? How should I measure? Logic models are very, very useful. But when you're looking at evaluation and really trying to understand why is something happening? Why didn't something happen? Who did it happen for? From my target population, are there some people for whom I achieved my goal? Are there some people who, no matter how well they did in the classroom, they didn't still achieve that long-term goal? These theory of changes help us to understand those intersections and really address some of them, maybe by partnering with other organizations, maybe by setting up support systems where, even if I can't influence that piece of the change model, I can at least make sure that my beneficiaries have access to it and they realize that I acknowledge it. So that's where a theory of change comes in. Okay, time for a very quick quiz to see if you have been paying attention or whether you need to go and get chai and coffee. So Mayor is going to launch a poll. I think we have a problem with question 1 where the answer got clubbed with the question. So don't answer question 1, but answer the rest. Yeah. Mayor, do you want to share the poll? Here we go. Ignore question 1. Answer the other, I think there are 5 questions.
Money is showing me 0% voting.
Has anybody submitted so far?
Not able to submit actually.
Yeah.
I've got some answers.
Oh,
I've got one.
Now it's showing blue. Yes, now it's showing.
Okay. It's not allowing you to submit? See, our outcome won't be met. We won't know whether you understood or not. Anybody else having a problem with submitting?
Yes, it's not submitting. You need to fill the first question, otherwise we won't be able to submit it.
Okay, fill something in the first question for fun then. We'll ignore it. And since we don't know who submitted what, we will not know which beneficiary we did not impact. So it's okay. Okay, we'll give you
even with the first question, it is not going.
Don't worry about it. This is the only poll we are going to run, thankfully. So
it's not getting submitted.
I could submit it after answering the first question.
Yeah, I answered both, but still it's not going.
All right, let's give it a minute and we'll end the poll and we'll just look at where we are. Okay. All right, I'm going to end it if that's okay. Here we go. Let's see how we did. I'm not sure we did very well. Okay. So what is common in all of these is the fact that they all have elements that give you a blueprint and a framework with which to work towards goals. What should you really use when you first get started and review? It is definitely a strategic plan. The reason I wouldn't pick a theory of change at a starting point is we're very often not aware of all those pathways and intersections. And it's only when your program starts. So I think you can always take a crack at it. But a theory of change, I would say, I would always review, especially along with my beneficiaries, along with my field staff, once my program has been in action, because it will enable me to look at things that perhaps I had not acknowledged. All those assumptions that I had made or not realized that this will in fact impact is something that comes into play when you've been around for a while. What helps you identify those missing pieces? Definitely a theory of change. I think a log frame often leaves that out. A strategic plan also very often will leave those things out, because like with data collection, I think with data collection, we tend to collect information that we believe is important and we leave out the stuff that we don't think is important, right? Similarly, with a strategic plan, we'll often put in things that we think is how my organization functions, and we may not acknowledge some of those other missing pieces. So a theory of change is the one that really helps you crack some of those pieces. What really is useful in terms of monitoring sources of verification? A logic framework, only because in a theory of change, we don't necessarily articulate indicators in the same way and specificity with which a logic model allows us to do it. And we'll do a detailed log frame later, so you'll see how that works. What is useful in an evaluation stage? Yes, in some way, all of them are useful, but hands down, I would pick a theory of change while I'm doing an evaluation, especially when you're doing third-party evaluations. It's always great to share that with whoever is evaluating the program, because it'll help them give you back stuff that you are looking for and maybe missing in your own measurement frameworks. It'll help you go out and ask those questions, which on an ongoing basis, you just don't have the bandwidth to do. But in an evaluation model, perhaps you could go and specifically look at what are all those enablers, what are all those things that become roadblocks to me achieving outcomes. Useful at a monitoring stage, definitely a log frame. Yeah. Super. I'm going to quickly take a few questions I think that had come up around these things. I feel we've covered a lot of it. Formalizing the strategy process, I think, is one that is really important. A lot of organizations will use a process of where strategic planning goes along with goal setting. So I find it best to start maybe sometime even in December, if you're following a financial year model, so that you start your discussions by December. You start to think about really what is my strategy? Where am I going in the long term? Over 3 years, what am I going to do? So that by the time you are in January, February, you actually have your goals for this year as well laid out as possible, and preferably over the next 2 years as well. It's also extremely important along with this process to make sure that one, you have your monitoring framework as well. So it'll allow you to keep answering the questions of, am I actually meeting the goals that I set out to achieve? Is my strategy taking me in the direction I want? It's very important to have a review process, quarterly if possible, if not more often than that. Also making sure that you leave space in that process for hearing other voices. I think in whatever form and manner, your strategic plan can be shared with everybody, whether it is donors, whether it is partners, whether it is field staff, to the bite size that is relevant to them. I think it helps keeping people on the same page. And also at the point that you're reviewing, it's a process where they understand the why of what they're doing and can contribute back in terms of why something is or isn't working. The next piece that we're going to do is really look at developing a logic framework, and hence from there an M&E framework, because a lot of you had asked, how should I document this? Where should this go? You know, how do I know which pieces I'm going to collect information on? So here is a log frame template that I've used often. Like we did with my Kanha planning, you've got inputs, activities, outcomes first. You've also got indicators, means of verification, and risks. And I think one of those things that we forget to do when we are planning is understand risks and assumptions. So we'll talk a bit more about that as well. I put those arrows there because really you can move in any direction you want. You can move from left to right or right to left. You can move from top to down. I prefer to start with my long-term outcome so that I can always have it in front of me and keep it in mind, that this is the final aim that I'm aiming for. And I like to do my input, output, activity piece first, because it helps me also look at whether all the activities I'm doing are actually meeting that goal or not, or are some things out of sync. I think oftentimes with organizations, we've started projects, we're doing things. It's a good time to reevaluate, is that even necessary? Is it taking me to that goal? If I'm doing an activity which is not contributing to my goal, either I need to change my goal because I'm missing something in the way I've articulated my goal, and that's a big problem, or hey, maybe I need to reevaluate whether I want this activity or not. So we'll do this horizontal piece together first, and as a next step, we'll do the vertical pieces. So what I've done, before we get to that, looking at sort of what really, and this is a very simple example, but really just keeping in mind when we're looking at these links between inputs, activities, outcomes, is it going to add up, right? For example, on your right is sort of a bad example of something, right? If I run only 2 summer camps, I'm not going to reach those 500 children that I had planned to do. So I need to make sure that my activity and those numbers and those targets that I'm setting will in fact get me to the goal. If I work on reading proficiency for 5th, 6th standard students, I can't have my long-term goal as I'm going to increase university enrollment, right? So it's about making sure, and a good way to do it really is to take these sort of things to somebody who's not familiar with your organization. You know, look at your peers, look at another organization, say, hey, just want to run this by you. Is there anything that's striking you as this doesn't fit, this doesn't flow? And it'll give you a heads up into what are those things that perhaps you need to address before you start to plan any further. So with Mayor's permission, we're going to try an activity now. So I'm going to share another part of my screen with you. Here we go. So here we are. This was my Kanha activity, but let's look at it. Is it large enough for you to read what's on the screen? Okay. So what I've done is, this is not CAP in its entirety. I've taken a small section of the work CAP does, right? And looked at just their legal advisory arm. Within legal advisory, all CAP does is response to queries from organizations for compliance issues, for legal issues, gives out opinions. So their aim is to have this expert panel and to be able to, on a regular basis, with a 48-hour sort of turnaround time, respond to queries that organizations may have in this whole domain of legal questions that they have, right? So let's do the same thing that we did for Kanha. What are some inputs that you feel CAP will need?
A lawyer, someone who knows compliance laws in India.
Okay, so lawyers, sure. Anything else? You can ask Mehra, she's right here, what she needs.
You need a good administrative team. You need you'll need money to run it.
Okay.
And you'll need clients, organizations who will come for you for advice.
So money, staff, absolutely.
Poonam has said CA and Hitokshi says, what did Hitokshi say? HR professional. Who says legal books?
Donors, we do need donors. Fund.
Donors. We kept them as okay. Sorry, there was one more interesting one that came up, Mel. What did you say before HR or after HR? Books, resources, knowledge, right? All right. What do we feel are some activities? So here's what CAP's vision is: to build a legally compliant, well-governed philanthropic sector. What is their mission? In particular for this vertical, we had said it's to create this enabling environment for organizations through legal expertise, right? So what would you put down as an activity that they would do?
Wow. Maybe some workshops where they can actually understand.
Okay. So maybe they might want to run workshops. That's fine. Okay. Anything else?
Impact assessment.
Sorry?
Impact assessments.
May not give them a compliant social sector.
Consultation.
Consultation. Absolutely. So they'll have consultations, email queries that they respond to. Anything else? I cheated.
Weekly circulars or monthly newsletters or something like that.
So some kind of communication, messaging that goes out to keep people informed. Sure. One of the things I cheated and I asked Mayor what they do actually do. And she said they have this expert panel that they need to set up. Okay. So here we go. What might be, therefore, if these are all the things that they're going to do, they're going to run workshops, they're going to respond to email queries, they're going to send out communications. What are some things that might be tangible outputs that will help you know that yes, these activities are actually happening.
Number of workshops that has happened.
Okay.
Number, the clientele that there is, number of clients they have on board.
Okay. What else?
Feedback from those who've done the course with them.
Sure. So feedback forms that they receive, or feedback emails maybe that they receive. Anything else? Look at your activities and tell me what would be tangible outputs that you would see.
Maybe increase in clientele because the existing one will, refer to others.
So that will come as part of our outcomes and look at indicators there. But in terms of outputs, maybe I'll just put things like when you have messaging like this, are there newsletters that go out? Do they go out every month? If it's, if the expert panel is maybe sending out legal opinions to people, how many are they sending out? Things like that. Now, for the sake of CAP, right now in this discussion, I've defined my immediate outcome as what I can expect to see within the period of 1 year, either immediately when that email and query has come in or the workshop is conducted. So something that's happening immediately, I want to know. My medium term, I've done 1 to 3 years, and long term, I've said 3 to 5 years. But it was up to me how I define these time frames. If your programs are relatively more stable, it's the same sort of thing that you're expecting. You could look at immediate outcomes to be even a 1 to 3 year time frame, and your long term to be sort of 5 years plus. It's entirely up to you. So going back to CAP, what is the immediate outcome? Because remember, what was that long-term impact that they want to have? A really compliant social sector. It's a big goal. It's not something, to be taken lightly. So what will tell them today as they are responding to clients, this is going to actually lead to people being more legally compliant. What is my immediate outcome?
Immediate would be satisfaction from the clients, them achieving their, I think satisfaction, gotten the right advice.
Something more, them achieving their?
I think they are, so if the organization is asking a particular question, then them achieving their goals or answers or, their compliant issues, if they could fix it.
Exactly. So it's not just that the client feels happy or says, Meg was very nice to me when she responded to my query. She always writes so politely. But it is, did my query get resolved satisfactorily, leading me to be legally compliant? Right? So whatever I'm doing, is it causing did this action make me more legally compliant? I'm just going to write. I can't. Yeah. So it's important to keep that bit in mind as well when we're thinking about what my outcomes might be. How about over a 1 to 3 year period? What will tell me that yes, people are moving in that direction of being more and more legally compliant? What will show me that at least the affiliates and organizations I work with are more and more legally compliant?
Whether the NGO who's done the workshop with them has implemented or not?
Absolutely. So our actions of NGOs, right? What do they actually do? Are they coming back to me with the same question even 3 years later? Because then they're clearly not being very legally compliant or using the information I'm giving them. So if the nature of queries is changing, if people are taking actions that are making them more legally compliant. Anything else you'd like to add here? Someone mentioned something about organization referrals earlier.
If the the number of clientele is increasing by word of mouth.
Exactly. So here is something which is one of those things where you need to decide as an organization whether this outcome is in fact the right one to measure for legal compliance, right? And that is only a personal sort of organizational call you can. If CAP believes that yes, more and more people being legally compliant, being able to resolve their queries, will in fact refer more organizations to them, then they should add this increase in clients here. If they believe, you know what, whether my clients increase or not, as long as the ones who are there are legally compliant, that is what I want to be held accountable for, that's fine too. So it's really a call for the organization to take. And long term, like we said, they wanted a legally compliant sector. Should that be our 3 to 5 year goal, do you think?
I think it's even maybe a 10-year goal.
That might be a 10-year goal, absolutely.
Or a long-term goal. Like you can't be sure.
So what would be a good mirror of that goal in a 3 to 5 year time frame? What should Naushad and Mayor expect?
I would
change in government that doesn't change laws, money.
We'll come to your risks and assumptions in a minute.
I would think for the 3 to 5 years, maybe they can just see if they have had, say, 100 clients in the last, last 3 years or whatever. If all those 100 clients are being compliant and, they've been able to achieve their own goals in a more compliant manner, or if they are, and they don't have any other legal situations pending.
Yes, absolutely agree that even if I can't look at the entire sector, can I look at my affiliates at least, and these people who've come to me and see, are there any legal issues facing them? Are they at least legally compliant? Yes? Does that make sense in the way you would look at this outcome piece playing out for your organization? If we go back to this, can you see my presentation again?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So if we go back to this piece, this is our first really big hurdle to cross. It is to make sure that I am happy with what is it that I want to measure before I come to the how to measure, because the how to measure is a question of what is my indicator, what is that tool, how will I go around collecting data, how often will I collect, who will collect, all those little things that go into making your framework complete. But that first piece is really around getting this right and making it really solid in a way that resonates well with your organization. So the next piece that we are going to do now is about really saying, how can we now develop this into a framework so that we can start to look at how to measure these things. So we'll go back to our example with CAP. And this time, we are going to work from top to bottom. And it's a much easier thing than you think. So, for our inputs, whether I have lawyers, whether I have money, whether I have donors or not, what would you need to track to know that this is all happening?
The number of workshops and the success of them?
Sure. So in my activities, I would need to track number of workshops, right? In my donors, for example, if I wanted to know that I have enough money, for example, that was one of our resources. Do I have money? I could look at funding raised, right? I could look at donors. I could look at what percentage are repeat donors, because I feel like that's an important indicator. So I don't have to keep going out and finding new people. Imagine we are just looking at funding and repeat donors. What would be the source of that information? Where would somebody at CAP access this information from? Who in your organization looks at donors, funding, how much money has come in?
Mani, there are some on the chat. Are you able to see it or should I read it for you?
You'll have to read it.
Okay. Somebody said finance.
Yeah.
Grant team.
Sure. Mayor, who is in your team? Do you have a finance team?
Yeah, Ashwini and Surjit.
Okay, so finance records would be my source of information.
My donor list, my donor database would tell me.
Awesome. So where is the source of information? I'm going to say my donor database. And with what frequency will I get this information? Do I have to wait for a year?
No. Like, as soon as the donor comes in.
So
look at it if you need it. I mean, if you are tracking it on a month or a quarterly basis.
So you are saying you're happy to track it monthly. I don't need to know. Weekly, I don't want to know. Daily, I don't want to know kitna paisa aaya. Monthly, but I'm going to keep an eye on this and see that I'm meeting it, right? What is a precondition that might be required? And these are where your assumptions start to come in, right? Somebody said something earlier about these clients, donors, people should at least know that CAP exists. There is some relationship there that is there. There is some information that is going out that people even know that CAP offers this service. So that is a precondition. If they don't have that kind of communication out there, none of this matters. Nobody will know that they need to be funded. Okay. Similarly, let's look at our workshops. So we've had workshops and email queries. If we just think of those, we can have the number of workshops as one of the inputs that we'll track, activities, sorry, that we'll track. What would we like to track for our emails? How should they track it? What do you think? Should they track it? Should they track all these email queries that come to them? Do you think they track their email queries? Okay, how would they track it? Okay, Mayor, you can give us the answer. What do you all do?
Everyone writes to CAP, so they should be able to tell, come on, Echo, you all have so many mails, Nirjari, Aura.
Man,
I think they must be just, you know, they just keep track of the total number of emails and I'm assuming the answers too, like, you know, how many replies have been sent and how many incoming.
Okay.
How many organizations ask queries and how often?
Would you be segregating them organization wise? Having a separate folder and keeping it organization wise?
Sure, absolutely. So number of queries with some amount of segregation.
She realizes that 700 folders for 700 organizations.
Well, you'll be surprised that they do have a pretty good track of what they do. And with what frequency should they have a log like this? So basically they have an email log that they use, or a tracker, let's call it. Mm-hmm. And with what frequency do you think something like this should be?
Monthly, 100% monthly they should be doing it, but if, you know, depending on the amount of traction they get, if they're getting too many, they should track it, you know, bi-weekly.
Okay, I'm going to be very optimistic and write weekly. On a weekly basis, they need to be on top of this and know how many queries they're receiving and are they responding to them and resolving things satisfactorily or not. Okay, what is my, sorry, that was the last bit here. So we'll move it. My email tracker telling me weekly, I'm going to move here. Again, what is an assumption? What would have to happen before any of this comes? I need to have an email account. If my server is down, I'm not able to even receive emails. This all won't. So one of the assumptions I'm making is that my email system will work. Another assumption I'm making is that I'm responding often enough for people to want to write to me, right? If I've sent haven't you done those things where you've sent a lot of mails to someone and never heard back? Or an organization, you've complained about something, you've written 50 times, nothing. If CAP started to do that, there would be no... Sorry?
Prompt replies.
Prompt replies, exactly. So if I don't do prompt replies, none of this is going to happen.
Yeah.
So I'm going to write prompt replies is an assumption that I am taking into account that if I don't do this piece, and the reason it's really important to try and think of these assumptions and risks and preconditions, honestly, is one of the main reasons why things don't work out the way you think they are going to. Because sometimes when you acknowledge these things, you quickly start to think, in my process, where have I put a check to see whether my replies are prompt or not? And if I haven't done that, maybe I won't know why I'm not getting the outcome I desired. Okay? My outputs, we will leave because they're really boring and we don't want to waste too much time on them.
So just go to assumptions, Mani.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we never assumed at CAP was the number of phone calls that came in. So people would call Naushad and say, I have a quick question. And there'd be like at least 5 in a day like that. Till one day Rati put her foot down and said every call also has to be tracked because that's also queries. So now even calls are tracked. So what I'm trying to say is an assumption is sometimes you miss out data when you're not cognizant of it.
Absolutely. So the assumption I had also made here is that queries are coming by email. What Meher is saying is that's an assumption. Actually, I'm getting a lot of queries by call as well. So if I don't do that, now maybe I need to go back and change this piece here and change it to email and call queries. Okay.
Would you guys be also getting like walk-in meetings in the office?
Absolutely. Sorry, this is only for this year that we have done calls and meetings. Emails. But usually that column that we have an Excel sheet where we track all the data. So we have meetings which are from the taken from the Google Calendar. There are calls that Naushad has to enter into an Excel sheet at the end of the day or at the week. And then the emails are all in advisory@capindia.in. And that's why we insist that people write to advisory only. Nodding his head because I think Echo may have been at the receiving end when they've been told.
So in this case, there would have to be somebody who's extremely tech savvy and on top of it to be keeping a track of all of this. Yeah.
You will be surprised. I'm going to show you how to keep a track of it without being very tech savvy.
Sorry, Hutokshi, you'll have to do it.
No, Hutokshi, don't worry. We'll transfer voice notes like that. So-and-so called today. And that'll ping somewhere and you'll know that there's a query that came in. I'm kidding, but it's not that hard. I think as long as we know what we want to do, it gets much easier. So the outputs I'm going to leave out. It's easy to know whether I conducted a workshop, how many feedback forms I got, how many newsletters, how many legal opinions. So I'm going to leave those. Let's come to those interesting bits, right? About, is my client satisfied? Is a query being actually resolved to satisfaction? Is that action leading to a legally compliant resolution? How would or how should CAP track some of these things? What is an indicator they can use?
I'd like to say something here, especially with regards to CAP. When we started, we were raw, absolutely having no clue. And after doing one session, we've learned so much. And then you feel that there is still some more learning to do. And then there is still some more learning to do. So the very fact that we keep coming back, even if it means to do the same workshop, but we value it.
So I'm going to put that here. And I'm going to say percentage of repeat clients. And I'm going to assume that you're coming back with different queries.
Even if they're the same, so what? I mean, you know, a same query may have a twist.
Okay. Queries with a twist?
I get it all the time.
Okay. Okay. I'm going to write it just like this for now. Because I think one of those things that perhaps CAP would like to look at is that those queries, because I want to know about you being more compliant, I'm trying to think of now behaviors that I will see in my clients that will tell me, they're moving in that right direction of compliance, right? So let's come back to the first one, my immediate outcome. I got a query, I resolved a query. What will tell me that it was in fact resolved to satisfaction and led to that legally compliant outcome?
The feedbacks maybe?
Feedback from the client.
What will you ask your client? What will you ask? What would you like to be asked? As affiliates of CAP, imagine you've sent a query. Yeah. And now you want to know that CAP is making sure that that led to the right resolution. How would you frame that question? Go on.
Did you follow the steps that we told you to, or did you do what you were told to in the first place? And then if there has been a hitch or an issue, then that is where the twist comes.
Okay. So did they follow maybe that process is a question I can ask them. I can ask them, was it a legally compliant resolution that you reached? Yeah. Okay. We might be simplifying it. I know a little bit here. All I'm trying to make a point is of the fact that when you know what it is you're trying to measure, how you measure it can actually be done in many, many different ways. So for example, we've got for our medium term sort of these percentage of repeat clients, percentage of queries that are sort of changing. You might decide what I actually want to do is conduct an audit for all my affiliates, maybe an annual audit for a sample percentage of affiliates where I'm going to go in and I'm going to say, okay, here is a checklist of those queries that you gave me. And I'm going to quickly tick off how many of those I see in action in your organization or not. So the how can, in fact, a good thing to do is to have multiple hows to give you that answer, so that you know that even if my clients every year I've been sending out a poll, everybody says, yes, these are fantastic solutions, I'm so legally compliant. And you say like 95% of CAP clients are legally compliant. CAP may decide, I want one more view of the same piece. And they might say, I'm actually going to go in and test this out to see whether it is happening or not. Yeah. Again, in my long term, affiliates are compliant or not. So besides an audit, any idea how they should find out if people are compliant?
So somebody said third-party assessment.
Absolutely. Good point. Be ready, Mayor. Okay. So this third-party assessment, maybe it's not an annual thing they'll do. Maybe they'll do it once in 3 years. Yeah, they may decide too much. I don't want to get into all this every year. So perhaps something like this resolution piece, all I might do is request an acknowledgement. I might create a format where I'm sending you an email query back, your response back, and saying, tick this off for me. Did you follow my process? Did it lead to a resolution, right? So I can have an email response here. And that's something that I could look at monthly. My medium term, whether people are becoming more compliant or not, are they in fact renewing their affiliation with me or not, is something that I could do maybe annually.
Do you want a fun element that I should share?
Absolutely. Go on.
So of late, Naushad has been really strong with people, maybe because the board has been strong on us. And people who refuse to, there are a lot of people who camouflage their organizations, their money making, but they actually pass off at non-profits. And they refuse to pay, or they want to try and not pay. So Naushad has now started this policy where he just removes people. And then they send a mail saying they're very upset or disturbed that they're not going to be CAP affiliates. And I never realized that was so important to people. So things like that. I mean, this was just a funny digression, but my point here is that sometimes it is of value to a person to be associated for their organization's needs.
Okay, absolutely. Let's finish this one by assigning somebody responsible. Let's not leave out that piece about who will actually collect that data. Like Hutokshi said, this sounds very tedious. Are you going to make me do it? Who's going to do it? So this email response tracking thing, maybe someone in Mayor's admin team can actually put it together every week. The client survey maybe is something that as a consultant, Mayor will decide she's going to do herself. And this client audit checklist, maybe, Mayor, who would like to do it in your organization?
Me.
Okay.
Okay, so I just like to make a point here that, yeah, it does sound tedious, Hutokshi, and those who are feeling like that. But not every piece of data needs to be collected. After 1 or 2 years of collecting data, you realize what's important, what's not. And one of the important things that I have realized, so I go through each and every query that comes into the email ID that we have, and I actually make that Excel sheet. But what it does is it informs me about, you know, the trends in the sector. If I see a question repeating or a trend repeating, then we make sure that we have workshops to address it. When we're doing a news magazine, we do articles on it. So somewhere that data is also informing my program and in turn keeping the affiliates, you know, up to date. So it's not just about collecting the data, it's also about being informed.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I think all of this together, so this is another sample of that earlier case that we had, but all of this together really becomes your measurement framework. And the idea here is that instead of worrying so much about trying to capture 15 different things, and we'll sort of talk at the end as well about how do you really prioritize what you're going to actually collect information on, because the last thing you want to do is create a zoo of data which you can't then find your way out of, right? So let's talk a little bit again more about how to focus your energies on what to collect. But overall, this is a picture of what your M&E framework and strategy should look like so that those two things go together. And why is it important to think about your goals and strategies in conjunction with this M&E framework? Because they're not two separate things. It is about making sure that you have the data that will tell you that you are in fact on track to meet your outcome. So if you want to take a quick stretch break, please do so. Here were some questions that came out from people, which I thought would be a good time to address them before we get into sort of tech tools and survey tools and things like that. So really sort of, I've tried to use examples of M&E indicators, but in your resource pack, I've also given you for various different types of organizations, you know, whether you're working on education, health, environment, there's so much information out there on what indicators are commonly used. So I've included that in your pack. One of these questions that came up really is around this whole, what about outcomes that aren't quantifiable? What about programs that are abstract? What about behavior change? And I think a lot of this really is to do with asking yourself, what will I see that person do? And that's why I chose the CAP example, right? When I say legally compliant, it can be a really hard thing to measure. So you have to work back to say, what will I see in that person, in that organization, that will give me an indication that yes, perhaps this behavior is in fact leading to that outcome. So for example, with sexual health, very often, right? You're only surveying clients about sort of what is their sexual behavior, are they being safe or not? The indicators that tell you that somebody has the right information about taking care of their bodies and reproduction are things very often around decision-making, knowledge around contraception. Do those lead to that outcome? It's not a measure of the outcome itself. But what it is an indicator that tells you I'm on track. Because, and again, in a lot of cases, there is plenty of research out there that tells you if a client does this, these are predictive indicators that in fact that behavior change will happen. So I think it's dialing back to what is that behavior change perhaps that will give you some idea that behavior is in fact changed. It's a similar thing even in terms of mindset shifts, right? Say I'm running a workshop on gender equality, and I feel that, you know, corporate organizations don't have a lot of women in these roles because women themselves don't step up. They don't believe they should ask for these promotions. They're a lot more hesitant than men. So my program really is around training women around how to be more assertive, how to go out and talk to their boss and really sort of ask for those positions within organizations. How do I know a mindset has changed? I can do a survey questionnaire, but I'm dependent on what my clients report. What is the behavior that will tell me, hey, is it really causing a change? Is perhaps by every 2 or 3 years looking at how many women are in management roles in that organization. Has that changed? I've started doing this program. It's been now 2 years. From the baseline to now, did it change? And again, I think another thing that's really important here is this concept of baseline. Whenever you start, even if you pick 3 indicators, and I would say the most important things to keep in mind are to make sure that they run as a chain and that you believe that one in fact leads to the other. And 2 is really to make sure that you're capturing that piece that in fact is telling you that behavior is changing. And there was this interesting question, I think, about incorporating the needs of CSR. And I feel one of the things that's happened in the sector over the past few years, especially with CSR funding, is that donor requirements can be quite complex. And a lot of organizations tend to approach data that they're collecting as a CSR requirement rather than as my requirement. And I think as soon as you start to think of how will this information serve me, how will it help me make my program better, what you'll be able to do is flip it so that that CSR requirement becomes really the stuff. The CSR person doesn't know, right, very often about what is important to your organization. What they're looking for is some evidence that you are in fact measuring. And they've developed all these different indicators based on their experience of what they feel that organizations should report. So often, I think when you can go back and say, well, here is how we do it, here is the way we track this change in our organization, I think you'll be able to marry these 2 pieces around the discrepancy between what a CSR requirement might be and what your own internal requirements are. I'm going to take a 5-minute pause here. Is there any questions? Before we're going to get to this piece next about looking at tools and looking at sort of tech tools especially. But is there anything specifically around indicators, measurement frameworks, this whole behavior change piece that hasn't been answered for you? Everyone has become absolutely savvy in terms of being measurement experts? All right. So let's go forward. Please feel free, really, I've been droning on now for an hour. So if you do want to stand up and stretch, please feel free to do that.
5 minutes.
Yeah, 2-minute washroom break.
Absolutely. Washroom break. Let's do that. So it's 4:09. Let's take 5 minutes of a pause and then we can start again. So I'll turn my video off and stretch as well. But if you want to ask me a question, I'm still here. So feel free. and look at is for each indicator, what type of information will you be able to access? So whether it is document reviews or surveys or analysis of, you know, records, there's a whole case studies, visual tools where you compare photographs, audio tools. There's something called, you know, especially when you're working on environmental issues, whether you're working with communities, sort of very interactive methods of getting people to share experiences. So I've included a whole lot of different common M&E tools there. In this piece, I'm talking much more just from a tech perspective of what are the tools that are available, because a lot of people had questions around it. The other reason I focused more on the tech tools is very often I hear this: my data is wrong. People don't give good quality data. People don't submit on time. You know, what can I do? What Hutokshi mentioned earlier, you know, who will sit and do all this all the time, and how tedious is it? And when I go back and sort of wade through this information, it just sounds like too much work. So I'm going to try and give you a few examples of things to simplify life. I think there's 3 types of tech tools that, in my opinion, commonly are accessed by organizations. The first is a CRM platform, right? Again, my favorite is actually Excel. I do everything on Excel. I use Google Sheets almost constantly now. And even without investing in a CRM platform, you can do wonders just between Excel, Google Sheets, and free tools that are available to you. However, the limitations of things like Google Sheets and Excels are that when I want repetitive data of clients, when I want to see trends, when I want to see how behavior has changed over time, it can get tedious. If I, for example, I'm working with a young woman and she's attending my program, I'm also making sure that she is getting a vocational training. I'm also sending her for something else. I want to look at her health outcomes. I want to look at mental health outcomes. As I'm tracking for the same client across multiple different interventions, it's better to have and invest in sort of technologies that allow you to really look at a client across different initiatives that you're running. Salesforce is very popular. Personally, not a big fan, only because I don't think any of us use 90% of what Salesforce can do. So there are a lot of homegrown solutions as well. A lot of Indian organizations nowadays, especially with COVID, are offering parts of their CRM platforms for free. Recently, an organization I was doing something for mentioned Zoho, so I put it here. They were very happy with it. So again, explore what is available out there. Then there are survey tools, right? A lot of these things, SurveyMonkey, Lime Survey, up to a certain point are free, up to a certain number of surveys. Google Forms, extremely tedious. If it's a very complicated survey, if it's simple stuff, super easy to use. Again, in your toolkit, I attended a workshop on some of these things, and there was a lean data tracking. So there's a whole list of different IVR tools, survey tools that people are using. So you can have a look at all those websites as well. And finally, there is a whole piece around data analytics and visualizations, which I think is becoming increasingly popular. And I'm a big fan only because it solves that problem about people aren't entering data. I think what visualization tools do is give you these very quick and easy snapshots that you can share with people about what is this data I'm actually entering, you know, why am I doing it? How can I use it? I think there are data visualization tools that, you know, bring back. I remember going to an organization once where the field worker told us, it's like a black box. You know, मैं तो ये सब एंट्री करती हूँ और फिर सबमिट करने के बाद मुझे तो कुछ मिलता ही नहीं है. तो M&E हमको रिपोर्ट भेजेगा, तब तक मुझे मालूम नहीं है मैंने क्या सबमिट किया है. So what she was ending up doing is in a notebook, she was making a note of all the people who had attended the workshop and what they had told her. Then she had to sit and submit it herself. So for her, she was actually doing 2 things, because the M&E person there wasn't necessarily solving her life. They were only solving their own life. So I think a lot of these survey tools, tech tools, visualization tools enable you to give back to that person who's collecting the data simple things that they can actually make sense of. So I'm going to talk a little more about 3 of them right now. One of these is Kobo Toolbox, absolutely free. You have to register as a humanitarian organization, especially with COVID, they've made a lot of it free. It's a survey tool, very, very powerful. The second one is sort of Datagram, and I'll give you a quick snapshot. It's a Indian company. Again, I think they have a subscription model where they'll help you sort of develop your tools, give you these dashboards, I think for some, it's like a 5,000 a month type of thing. And then my new best friend is Google Data Studio. Absolutely free. I love it. So because we used CAP as an example, I'm going to show you what I did with CAP first, and then I'll show you the other 2.
Just one thing that let them know that whatever the studio, whatever you use, you have to ultimately enter that data, huh? It's not like going to fly in there.
Of course it's going to fly in there. Okay, so here we go. I'm not yet presenting, am I? Okay, so what I did, again with Mayor's permission, is I took some dummy data from CAP. And remember we said, who will enter this? I've hidden the names of the organizations, but imagine that this is their information, right? For every organization on my left is in column A, which is the organization name. I have a drop down which tells me which is the type of organization, so I know if it's an affiliate organization or not. There's some categorization they've done. Which geography are they in? They've entered the month that they got the query in. How did I get this query? Was it by email? Was it by call? What were they asking? So again, there's a few quick sort of things that they've got here about the type of query that they've got. What did that query focus on? And what are the topics, right? So this was just to give you an example of what is possible. What we did with that is created this dashboard on something called Google Data Studio, where it says, okay, so look, from April to now, I've served 101 organizations and received 309 queries. You know what Hutokshi mentioned earlier, is there some sort of categorization? Yes, they've got, you know, what kind of organization, how am I getting my queries? So 86% of my queries are really coming via email. A few are coming on call. Some I haven't even entered that information for, so I don't know how they've come in. On average, an organization sends me sort of 3 queries. These are the type of queries. So FCRA seems to be the biggest. You know what Mayor was saying earlier, when you start to see this, you can start to therefore see what do my clients need as well, right? So for example, while I was looking at this, I realized that, go away, grants. For example, there was something here like this, you know, what Hutokshi said earlier, who's going to sit and enter? Clearly, this is a mistake, right? I don't have to wait for 1 month and get somebody to do anything major to clean things like this up. I can just go back, you know, make sure that I find, or maybe tell this person who was entering this information, hey, you've got a few wrong entries. Maybe she will like to then correct them for me. And if I go back to my dashboard and sort of just think I should get rid of this, right? So I think all I'm trying to show you with this piece is really about how easy it is to make sure that you're able to. So imagine that almost CAP had this for last year as well as this year. What they would be able to do is say, okay, in the month of July, do I typically get a lot more queries because the government is constantly changing their, you know, and a lot of new notifications around taxation maybe come at that time. Maybe we can go here, just look at these 80 and see what was unique about them. When I look at my NGO direct, you know, affiliates, are those queries different? Did anything change in the way, sort of in the type of queries that they have versus what somebody else has? When I look at sort of these COVID queries, for example, is there any relation between this? Who's asking those questions? Is it a size of organization? So what it will enable you to do is explore the information you already have access to. One of the things they don't have up here is that response time, right? Maybe if we built in, we didn't have a column here which said, you know, when did the query sort of, this is when the query was received. All you need to do is enter information about when the query was actually resolved. What did the client say in terms of how that query was resolved? And you'd have a satisfaction index. You'd be able to see which are the queries that we most often are unable to resolve satisfactorily. Maybe there's some particular expert that I need to go out and get for those things. So I think the idea is to give you a way to engage with information that will very, very quickly, almost on a weekly basis, give you at least a snapshot of what's going well and what's not. And for those timeframes where you're saying, okay, this I want to do, like really for something like this, Meher and Naushad could do this every day. Look at it and see, is it going well, is it not? Here's another example from Kobo Toolbox, which I spoke about, right? Which is, again, this is a survey, it's a student evaluation. They've pre-populated a list of, you know, who is the student. So I've taken Anu. This is some sort of, you know, assessment that this organization needed, where the field worker is just submitting all of these things. And what it will give her is this, right? An immediate dashboard, which allows her to look at, for example, this is the attendance one, right? Who attended my program? So for example, the person, all they did here was they entered a survey form which said name of school, so many people in class. They got a drop-down list of who were all the students expected. All you had to do was untick the ones who were absent that day, click submit. Very quickly you get a sense of, you know, between different geographies, is there a difference in my attendance? Is there a difference by grade for a particular school? So again, with all of these kind of tech tools that are out there now, there is more than enough available to simplify your life for free, to at least ensure that your data collection is going well. The insights you can come to later, but I think there's things that you can explore that will give you those answers. So really, I think when I think about personally for me, what I would sort of recommend really prioritizing, and after this, what we're going to do is just look through all the questions that came in and see specific cases if we can answer them. I think first look at what is already available to you. What are you already tracking? Definitely look at your external commitments. We all need to keep our donors happy. So what have I already promised? Because those I can't go back on. Make sure you continue to collect those, right? Then re-look at that framework that you've come up with and say, what will really help me improve the program? Look at your strategic plan. These are my goals. Over the next year, if this is my priority, if, for example, CAP decides that, you know, I'm just going to work on responsiveness. For next year, I want to be extremely responsive and make sure that this 48-hour response goes out to all emails. Maybe make that a priority and say, will that help me? You know, what will I need to put in place that will really enable me to meet that goal? Is your data valid? Is it reliable? That's the point around really, when you get that information in, are you going to look at it and be convinced that it's actually telling you what you want, right? A lot of times I find that people look at things and say, नहीं ये बराबर ही नहीं है, तो ऐसे तो पूछेंगे तो यही आंसर मिलेगा, तो ऐसे मत पूछो, पहले से ही सोच लो कैसे पूछोगे, right? So is it going to convince you that, yeah, what I'm getting, because don't take the trouble otherwise. And I think very often with surveys, we tend to put everything in, every single question that I want to know about, forgetting that actually the person who's answering the questionnaire is a human being. They may not want to give us the answer. So also think about that piece. The disaggregation, again, extremely important. I think what Hutoxi mentioned earlier, right, about the type of organization they should collect. Similarly, with any indicator, what are those few things, whether it is gender, whether it is organization type, whether it is geography, get at least a few different variables that you will be able to examine, so that when you are asking yourself, who did this work for and who didn't it work for, you'll be able to get some deeper insight from that information you're getting. Will it be realistic? The idea of having all those very many different types of ways, you know, when we were talking about whether CAP does a third party evaluation or they do their own checklist audit, the idea is, what do I have access to? I have limited resources. What do I prioritize spending that money on and my time on? Maybe this is not the right time. Maybe an in-depth sort of survey is the only way I can answer this question. I just don't have the time and money right now. Maybe for now, I'll just do a quick survey questionnaire. It'll at least give me some indication whether things are working or not. I will look at doing something more in-depth another time. And can it be available for multiple sources? Again, I find, especially for things that are critical to you, having a triangulation, having various different stakeholders answering that question in a different way is a great way to validate whether that information is actually taking you in the right direction or not. So here was some sort of tools.
Can you, hi, Maniji. Yeah, I just wanted to request you, can you just elaborate on more the third last, disaggregated? Can it be disaggregated? I didn't really understood what does it mean.
It's very simply the thing around thinking about the different little variables that are different between clients. So in a classroom, for example, if I have 14-year-old kids, right? Maybe gender is one thing that is different. What else is different about them? It could be some of them come from single parent households. Some of them have both their parents. Maybe another way to classify them, I guess, differently is their family income level. So if you feel, and this goes back to that whole theory of change piece, if there are elements in your strategy, in your plan that you feel these are the sort of things that will influence whether I will meet my outcome or not, what you should look at doing is capturing that information about that beneficiary or client, so that when you look at your outcome, you'll be able to do that disaggregation. Tell me by gender, tell me by geography, tell me by income level. Did that outcome change? So therefore, maybe you'll find that, for example, in the CAP example, right, that their client satisfaction survey is at 70%. But if they look and they might feel that, you know, for mid-size organizations, actually, I'm at 100%. For very large organizations, I'm only at a 20%. It'll help them also read, if I want to service these clients better, here is perhaps the expertise I need to build. So disaggregation is just a deeper understanding of the different variables, of the different ways that people are different, so that you can then categorize them and see your outcome in that perspective.
Yeah, I mean, like for a same sample, we are taking variables in different sets and prioritize them, how to deal with them or maybe interpret them, right?
So that's what. So make sure that you collect that piece of information for all your entire sample. Right? There's no point doing the gender only of half the students and the income of somebody else. I need to know, if I have 1,000 people, I need to know everybody's income, everybody's gender, everybody's information about that variable in order for me to then dissect my outcome accordingly.
Okay. Thanks.
Not at all. So here we, and now there's just a whole list of questions that we're going to look at. So again, if you want to stretch, feel free. What are various tools and methods? Like I said, there's a whole lot of methods that I've put into your pack that you can go through. How do we really know that things are going to be accurate? I feel the best way is to here and now, look at the data that's coming in. And that's why I like some of these tech tools that sort of almost immediately give you a simple analysis where you can quickly say, oh, you know, this data is only blank. We need to correct it. Oh, this information is coming in, but you know, in this, like I feel a lot of times we wait too long to do the analysis, then look back at information and say, we didn't capture this. So while you're planning pilots, I think also plan the pilot of your data collection. So for example, an organization I worked with recently plans to do sort of a school program online for a whole lot of nearly, I think, 2,000 schools. When the first 3 schools pilot data came in, we quickly analyzed it and said, oh, this is not what we wanted to know. Or, hey, this is not telling us what we wanted to know. So what we solved for 3 schools now will be true for 2,000 and my work is done. Rather than wait for the first 100 and then say, oh, this question actually the kids didn't understand, right? Loopholes between data process, formation and interpretation. I'm not sure I understood, but really I think my sense is don't think of things as loopholes of things that people, you know, just think of it as trying to ask the right questions of your data and seeing if those answers are correct. The interpretation really is everybody interpreting it the same way? At the end of the day, I think there are multiple ways that analysis is presented. Any market research agency will tell you that, you know, whether I say 50% of clients believe that this toothpaste is the best, or I say half the people who were surveyed actually didn't like this product at all. And it's actually the same 50%, right? So it's a question of how you interpret and present as people who sort of are sort of leading sort of organizations. I would say definitely think about whether it resonates right with your organization or not. How do outputs and impacts sort of contribute? I think we've spoken a lot about making sure that those chains are there. The quality at scale piece, I think, is very important, especially as you're growing. And a great way to do it is actually through your data, you know, to look at year on year that I did this program for 2,000, set up your system there. I think in some ways, younger organizations, smaller organizations have the benefit where they can get their systems right while they're little. You get it right for 2,000, you do it for 20,000. Do you see the same result? Is something that in fact your processes, your tech system should be able to assist you at maintaining that quality, I think, at scale. Role of a MIS officer, and the reason I wrote it here is because there was this interesting question about what do I do if I feel like my strategy isn't going to be met and my M&E is reflecting that. And I think for a lot of M&E people, that is a genuine quandary. Organizations often expect that the people in M&E will give them only the answers they want to hear, that everything is working superbly well and it's all going well. That's not the role. I think the E part of the M&E is that whole evaluation element, is about saying what's working, what's not working, why isn't it working. Again, I think from personal experience, I would say if you're an M&E person in a situation like this, soften the blow. When you go to an organization and tell them their strategy isn't working, tell them why you think so and offer some solutions that look, from what I'm looking at, here are the pieces that aren't really working well. Perhaps here's something we could try. Here's a pilot we could run that might help us understand what direction my strategy therefore should take. So I think, I hope that answers that question about what to do. Who are the people responsible? I think, again, from don't think of program people separately from M&E people. As if you are an M&E person in your organization, I think of yourself really as that support vertical. Your job is to support and make sure that you strengthen the program, strengthen the teams. Often we tend to keep the information only to ourselves and then worry that other people aren't quite being carried on in the process. So I think involve more and more of the teams, you'll be surprised how much people can contribute to this process of strategy formulation. Timelines, yes, strategy is continuous. It is in fact about whether you do your work as an organization and you're effective or not. Reviewing doesn't have to be. I think it can get extremely painful to keep going back to the drawing board all the time. So keep those review timeframes, which are 6 monthly, annual, to revisit. Documentation, again, I actually don't think you need a lot more than that framework that we created for CAP as a document. The other piece that I think is really useful, and this is more just for M&E people, is definitions of indicators, right? When I say percentage of clients satisfied, for example, which exact field, what will I look at? Which is the denominator, which is the numerator, and how will I actually calculate? I think having that kind of clarity certainly helps, but that's a more sort of data analytics type of thing. In general, to keep your strategy and M&E consistent, I think what we've done today, that kind of framework is very, very adequate. What's an ideal time strategy plan for an established NGO? Again, I think for me, it's not so much about how large you are, how established you are. All staff need the same amount of training. In fact, getting people to buy into your strategy and communicating your strategy. I think I did a really interesting thing once where we had a visual tool and we took an organization, different people in the organization, and we asked them, how do you feel about your organization? Which of these best represents your organization? And it was just a good way to know that at different levels of the organization, how much clarity did they have? So one of the pictures we had used, for example, and this was just, it was like a free, there were many different images. One of them was of a maze. And it was interesting, like in some organizations, someone would say, I feel like that is where we are very often with our strategy. It feels like, there are so many different things I'm trying to find myself out of a maze. While another organization, somebody else said, oh, I feel that's how it is because I feel I have so much clarity on how to come out of that. It's this hard work that I do and the program that we run helps me through my maze, right? So it was a very simple way to know just really how people within the organization feel about your strategy. Do they feel like, I don't even know what they're talking about. Strategy is something someone up there does. मैं तो अपना काम करती हूँ. That's a problem. I think when you find people are bought into what you're doing, हाँ हम ये कर रहे हैं क्योंकि हम साथ में इस direction में जा रहे हैं. I think it's a much more powerful thing. Again, strategically thinking about M&E, yes, absolutely. Just the same way as you would with a strategy for your organization, have a strategy for your M&E really in terms of that prioritizing, right? In year one, I will only do this much, I'll get it right. You're much better off doing less and doing it well than trying to do it all. Tailor-made strategies, absolutely. Every organization I've ever worked with has different strategies for their verticals. It's important that it all comes together as part of a big organization vision. It's very important that when you especially are running several verticals, that people feel that we work together. I think an organization that I did some work for had something similar where they had health, they had education for women, they had something else. And again, field staff often would feel कि उन लोग के पास data रहता है, वो same family का है, वो हमें देते नहीं है. So they almost felt like they weren't part of that same organization at all. And to change that mindset into thinking, it's the same beneficiary. As far as the client is concerned, it's one organization. Let's all act like one organization, right? And share information in a way that best serves the people that we are working for. How do you decide when to evaluate externally? I've come across, again, different cases. I know of organizations that build into their program cost when they're giving a donor the external evaluation piece as part of the proposal. So rather than do that data collection internally, they actually have an external person doing the entire data collection for them. So that's sort of one extreme. Others, I would say, really at a time where you feel relatively confident that your program is stable and you're looking for someone external to come and validate the work you're doing. What I found with external organizations is think of it as a partnership. Do not ever leave it to the external evaluator. Okay, you go and do this evaluation. It is a partnership. It is a dialogue. To keep in mind that at the end of the day, these findings need to help me make my program better, will help you, even things like setting time frames, looking at the pilot surveys. That I remember a case where, again, an organization where an external evaluation was happening. The evaluator came back sort of 6 months into the evaluation and said, we didn't manage to contact the 300 respondents. We only contacted 200 because they weren't available. And the organization said, well, why didn't you tell us at that time? We would have helped you in some way. We could have set up those calls. So problem solve together. And I think when you're doing external evaluations, just make sure that you realize that you will have to invest enough time with them to get the most out of it, rather than just think of it as, okay, now it's outsourced. Yeah, impact papers, assessments, white papers. I think, again, white papers are a great way for even organizations to feel good about what they do, so that internal information as you're getting in, if you're able to contribute to a body of knowledge, use evaluation, that E part of the monitoring and evaluation. I think a lot of times we only focus on the M to see workshop is happening or not, how many are happening, who's attending, but not really to think about the evaluation component. I would absolutely encourage people to do it. Legal compliance requirements, I don't know if Meher can add. To my knowledge, it's not a legal requirement, but again, for every large donor, large grant, most organizations, granting organizations do expect you to have a strategy, even if you're a small organization. From a data collection perspective, there are certainly legal requirements in terms of consent, especially when you're working with, minors. A lot of legal requirements, I think, now in terms of protecting the privacy of individuals. I think when you have a donor, for example, who asks you for a list of your clients, names, numbers, and information, I think, and Meher, I think, can add here.
So the news is that M&E is going to become mandatory for CSR. It's not passed yet, but that's proposed. So it could be that it will become a requirement, legal compliance wise. And the second thing is that definitely looking at your organization's constitution, what you have in your objects, your strategy, your monitoring, your compliance needs to match with that. So you can't be like in your document, in your constitution, you can't be saying that I'm going to say Akanksha was set up to, serve the underprivileged children, and they suddenly can't start doing something else. They have to stick to their core. Otherwise they'll be in trouble.
I would also look at things like, really sharing information of beneficiaries now, whether it is photographs, whether it is, Aadhaar numbers, should we even be storing? I advise most of organizations I work with, please don't store Aadhaar numbers. If you're going to keep it, keep the last 4 digits or whatever, because these are sort of now legal things that you need to be careful of. 100% client consent, because again, it's very old fashioned and old school to expect that. I think a lot of people feel like because you're a beneficiary, I now have access to every bit of information about you. That's not true. So unless your client has explicitly given you consent to share their case study, their report, do not share names, any identifier information, even with your donor organization, because it is no longer a situation where it feels like, just because I'm funding this program, I have access to all these. Clients are always welcome. I always feel like, I remember recently actually, during COVID, a client saying that we cannot visit the site, So we must have access to all these students' information because we would like to call them up and do our own verification of whether something's happening or not. And the organization said, no, these are minors, first of all. So you can't talk to them without their parents' consent. And we can't have this, we cannot share this information with you. What we can do, however, is with the permission of the parents, we will facilitate a Zoom call. You're welcome to come in, chat with the students, ask them what they want, but our facilitator will be present because we are the sort of caretakers for this group of people. So I think there are ways to negotiate. Meher, you want to add anything around confidentiality?
No, I think that's it. I mean, there are, we can go deeper into child protection with the child protection policy and all that, but not required at this point. But yeah, you've summed it up. Basically, even basic etiquette to not take anything without anyone's consent. And it even comes under POSCO and JJ Act.
Manije?
Yeah.
I have a query.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're talking about consent. So our organization works in tribal area, and we ask for the vital information, like for example, pregnant ladies or the young adolescent girls or boys, for their health purpose only. I mean, so is it that we should also ask for the consent from their side?
I think, to me, I feel like whenever you take any data from anybody, treat it as their information.
Yeah.
They have rights over. So really, then they have the.
Okay. So.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So do we need to fill a form or something, or I mean, how we are going to take consent from each and every person? If you are visiting in a day, for example, in a day we are visiting 30 people, and we are getting information from them. So do we need to fill 30 forms for the consent, or any other? I mean, how to do it? That's the question.
I mean, I guess somebody else can share from their experience, but to my mind, it's not each day. When you become part of my program, I think I need to make sure that you understand what you're signing up for, and part of that is, hey, I will be collecting information about you.
Yeah.
So I think it's the same way as,
just verbally.
Just a beneficiary consent form, or like she said, when they sign up for the program, they know what they're getting into. Nijari, would you like to add to it, since you work also with a large group?
So we work with cancer patients, and we work actually on the field in the hospital, which is Tata Memorial. Over there, our consent is in such a way that we get like daily around more than 50 to 60 patients per staff of mine. So what happens is, over there with that large crowd, we do not take any physical consent. Like the forms, we don't make them fill the forms, but we have an MOU with the hospital where we have told them that because we are providing certain services, we will be will have to take that data to provide them those services. And the data is not anything about their disease or any clinical data. The data is just general demographics, your age, phone number, name. But if we take, like, anytime we have them come out or do something, like we give them ration or we give them certain resources, we provide them with any kind of equipment or, any other extra money or any of that. If we provide them all of that, then we take a consent. Like we have a form where we make them fill the form, and we say we are taking a photograph, or we're providing you this. So, you'll have to give us consent. And if we want to use their stories or any of it and, put it on our social media, or if, like you said, donors come to us and say, oh, we would like to actually see some of this, we kind of, like you said, we'll have to work. Like we had similar situation in COVID when one donor said that I want to give ration, but you'll have to send me a photo of all the people because I'm not coming physically to give the ration. So my first reaction was, then it's okay, we don't want to give the ration, it's okay. Because I can't give you, a photo of everyone, because in this COVID situation, I'm not going to create a crowd, and it's because of that I can't have people come around and give rashes. So then I said I can give you one or two. So individually, when I call them, I'll have someone take them, say take a photo, and they'll have to give their consent that they're okay with it in a physical form. Then I'll give it to you. So then she was like, okay, we don't need it for all, but we may need one or two. I said that we'll be able to provide, but we can't provide data or any other like names or phone numbers of the people. You have to just trust us that we are doing it the right way.
We did. I came across a very similar thing. So I was involved with ration distribution through Antarang in Dharavi. And this tool that I shared with you, the datagram, that was the first time I came across it, because we used it as a tracker, and every sort of, it was being done with the municipal corporation, another organization, Antarang. So what we actually had this tracker where at the end of every day, you could online see how many kits distributed, which location. It was quite exciting and very, very intense. But we did the same thing. We said, we will not be sharing names and numbers. It's already hard enough for people without receiving calls from you saying, Mila kya kya mila. If you want to entrust us with this, we are willing to do it. In terms of getting feedback, we did, because we knew certain beneficiaries, said, if you would like to share your experience, here is the number. Like the person who was calling to coordinate said, you know, you can share. And we did. So we did get sort of messages, very sweet messages back from people saying, you know, we have never received this quality of rice and we are so thankful. Simple things like that. But when people shared, we could then pass those things along. So, yeah.
Ranjana, I would just also change the names and, you know, not keep identity, and that's okay. You know, even if you're sharing, just avoid identity. That's it. Change the name when you're reproducing the story. Photographs which are not focusing on the close-up of the person, good enough.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay. Mani, we can move on. Yeah. Your questions answered, Ranjana?
Just in a similar line only, for example, school going children, or actually because we are working in tribal area, so we have ashram shalas, ashram schools, if you know. So there also there are good, you know, kind of stories, you can say. And I had an idea that if we can write successful stories or stories only. So can we, if we are using names and information, is it legal, or it is I mean, do we need to have take permission from the organization, from the parents, from children, the student about whom we are writing the story? So that sort of information also, is it, I mean, legal, or is it advisable to write down in the...
Like I said, under the JJ Act and the POSCO, you need to take, there is something which says that you cannot compromise on the dignity of the child and the vulnerable children. Okay. So what you need to do is you can change names, not reveal their identity, and you can use the case studies.
And also, once you have consent, I think it's also about what that client gets out of it, right? I've seen cases of organizations who do it really well. Like some of these people feel genuinely good about seeing themselves on Facebook, seeing their story on Facebook. So many people complimented like the courage I had. So it can be done in a very, very positive manner, right? Getting them to write their story in the way that is most meaningful to them, and using their words to share it rather than. So I think there's ways to, I think stories are extremely powerful. Beneficiaries are happy to share them. It's just a question of making sure that anytime, whether it is a story or even a piece of data, that the person who's contributed it understands how it's going to be used. Let me tell you, it's like all of us very blindly when we sign up for any apps, any services, we just say we agree to terms and conditions, and we actually don't know that we're signing away all our rights to Google. But let's not do the same thing with the people we work with and sort of make sure that they understand what they're signing up for. Okay. So going back to some of these questions, I think I clubbed some of these together because I feel that really it's a question.
In the interest of time, maybe if their questions have been answered, then they don't need to then you don't need to run through. But if any of these they want, they can just ask you here. So
yeah, there's only 2 or 3 slides more, and then we can sort of say, so yeah, I think it was more around this piece of communication to partners, donors, third parties. Again, I think from the strategic plan to the indicator that is being collected to how it will be used. I think if you can keep people informed, this piece around, when there is a mismatch between a partner's expectation or donor's expectation and yours, can quite easily be resolved early on by having some of those conversations saying, oh, we've just come up with our new strategy plan. Here is what we're looking at. Oh, we've just come up with this, M&E, this thing. These are some things we're going to track. Making sure you share often enough these reports that are coming on, and also making sure that you understand who needs to see what. So it doesn't need to be a standard report everybody gets, but if you know that your partner is interested in this piece, maybe sharing those on time, not waiting for some final report where suddenly they look at things and be like, I didn't even know this is what you were working on. So preventing surprises. This piece, around, this work, tech and data, and how do you, especially with community workers, again, I think we underestimate just how much people enjoy having their life simplified by technology, whether it is an Anganwadi worker or it is, a hospital staff. I think when you give them tools that really make their life easier so that they can focus on the job that they need to do and the data collection just happens as part of the work that they're doing, people love it. So think of it like that. Any solution that you're going to introduce, make sure you're approaching it almost bottom up to see, is it going to solve this person's problems? Is it going to help them do their job? Then you'll find that people are sort of given really much more excited about doing these things. I kept the staff retrenchment second line piece question here. It's not M&E related, but I think it is in a way strategy related, right? And I think personal, again, experiences, if you can get people to buy into your vision, to buy into that strategy, to be really excited about the work they're doing, if your data collection and metrics can help people feel a sense of progress, I think the work we do can be so hard. And it's like that, that change I want to see, I don't know when, 20 years later, right? So how do I know that I'm making a difference? If you can find those little pieces of, even if it is simple feedback, right? I think mayor's admin person would be probably happy to know that, oh, people are appreciating the service, the promptness of the response, things like that, to motivate her to even create those logs. The what's in it for that person is an important thing to keep in mind. I think, yeah, that's about it really from me. This is my mantra. These 4 things, whatever you do, make sure that there's clarity in why you're doing it. Make sure you communicate and communicate consistently. Make sure your data collection is really consistent. Keep the culture of your organization in mind. It's very, very important that all these bits of strategy, M&E fit and resonate well with what that organization really represents. Prioritize. Make sure you set time frames for things. Don't try to do everything. It'll just leave you feeling completely frustrated and everybody around you, and they'll want to shoot themselves. Be patient. I think one thing that we seem to forget is that just because I set up a plan, I'm not going to have data on day 1. I need 3 months of data collection perhaps before I start to see really trends and things, right? So the other piece I find very frustrating is very often we don't collect data about certain things. Then we want to go back in time and answer a question. Don't do things like that. Just be clear and acknowledge for yourself that ye hai, ye nahi hai. Let's move on and start today. Definitely be prepared to learn. It's lots of fun, I think, when you are. Invest in technology. There is stuff out there. Doesn't have to be big investments. For me, big investments happen when things are relatively stable. So if you're going to buy, for example, a survey tool, sometimes ask yourself, how often am I going to be repeating it? If it's part of my process, I know it's something I constantly need to do, absolutely. Spend money, do it right. If it's something which is a one-off, try and make do with a freebie as long as it gets the job done. Yeah. So that's really it from me. Here's the CAP resource pack. And
one last query, Maniji.
So 1 second, just before you start, I think I've put all these links. You will be getting this presentation as well. A lot of these resources have, and there's more, is a whole lot of different, very sensible tips on how to go about it. So feel free. I've included my email as well at the beginning. So if you have a burning query, need introductions to tech tools, say I'm looking for something, I'm happy to make introductions if I know a solution. So yeah, so now we can sort of just keep it open for other questions, but I'm going to say thank you for your patience. It's been 2 intense hours. Hopefully I didn't bore you to death. And I am going to send you a feedback form to tell me how I did. So please make sure you fill it, because that really gives me tips into what's working, what's not. So Mayor will send you that as well. Or maybe I'll put the post feedback form here in the chat as well while we're answering questions. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Mani, would be a good idea to put it here in the chat, because once people go off, they generally forget.
They forget. Okay, let me find it. Sorry, you had a question till then.
Yeah. Just a quick question. Can we get this PPT? No, are we going to get this presentation?
Absolutely, along with lots of other documents.
Oh, thank you so much. That would be truly helpful to us. Yes.
Absolutely. So what I'm going to do is I'll put the feedback form here, but I'll just show you this piece. This is the resource deck that we've created, and Mayor is going to send it to you. But it has like this, a whole bunch of survey tools. It has some examples of a theory of change and a sample strategic plan. These are all the sample indicators. This is a framework for the MNE. This is a log frame template with an example. These are all those different types of tools. And this was that exercise that we did together. So you have all of that you can refer to, and you can ask me if any of it doesn't make sense.